at least half a dozen classes in combination who had opportunities to sit and talk with Ms. Blades in classes, over lunch, and informally. And we're extremely grateful to Kay and Jane for their vision for a program that is not only a lecture, which is what we're, and a conversation, which is what we're about to enjoy, which is sufficient and wonderful in and of itself, but also a program that gives students and faculty an opportunity to have ongoing and deep conversations. And conversation is going to be a theme for us this evening. The Innovator in Residence program is designed to create interaction with students, members of the community, and members of the university community, and to provide opportunities for students and the community to interact with out-of-the-box thinkers, leaders who we can explore and discuss limitless possibilities of innovation through creative thinking and risk-taking with someone recognized for doing just that. Joan Blades is the co-founder of MoveOn.org and MomsRising.org. She recently co-authored The Custom Fit Workplace, Choose When, Where, and How to Work and Boost Your Bottom Line, which is the winner of the Nautilus Book Award. She also co-wrote The Motherhood Manifesto, which won the Ernesta Drinker Ballad Book Award in 2007. She's the co-creator of Living Room Conversations. Living Room Conversations is about fostering conversations among individuals with differing points of view to practice civil discourse by hosting respectful, collaborative, constructive, solution-forward conversations that we can use to build healthy communities. She's also a software entrepreneur, a nature lover, a former attorney and mediator, an artist, a mother, and a true believer in the power of citizens like us who can build and rebuild our communities through respectful discourse. It is now my distinct pleasure to invite Ms. Joan Blades, our second annual Innovator in Residence, to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, that was a wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me, for inviting me to be here. I am going to attempt to tell you about all three multiple efforts that have gone on, and I'll start with the first. We'll go chronologically and allow them to interweave and interact to a certain extent. So, mention of the software piece. Some people remember flying toasters? Yes. That was our software company. Thank you. Some of you do remember flying toasters. Also, well known for a game called You Don't Know Jack, which you can now get on your iPhone, I'm told. But I'm not associated with it anymore. What happened was back in '98, Wes and I, there was this scandal that had been going on, an impeachment scandal around Bill Clinton. And Wes is my husband. We wrote a one-sentence petition and sent it to under 100 of our friends. Congress must immediately censure the president and move on to pressing issues facing the nation. It was a business person's plea for sanity. It was a mediator, because I am a mediator by origin, plea to get back to the business of running the country, because polarization is not good for us. And what happened when we sent out that to our under 100 friends and family is they sent it on to others, and within a week we had 100,000 people sign that petition. And all of a sudden we're going, oh, we've got to figure out how to do something with all these people that have arrived at our doorstep. And what we did was help them communicate with leadership in every way we could figure out how, and really push to get people to vote. And then 2 weeks after the vote, the House voted to impeach, despite the fact that it was felt that it was generally an unpopular move, impeaching the president. At which point, our flash campaign became a little more lengthy, because when we have elected leaders, we want them to reflect our values. And that was the point at which we did the We Will Remember campaign, and in 2000, we raised over $2.3 million in small contributions. Average contribution size, $35. Now, that may not sound like a big deal to you today, but in 2000, that was radical. It was a proof point that it would actually be possible to run for office and not be dependent upon big money of some sort, that small donations could add up. And now we know, hundreds of millions of dollars have been raised that way in many elections. But that was an amazing thing at that time. Well, the next viral moment for Move On was the lead up to the war with Iraq. And this is the first advertisement that we did. And then we helped organize round the world vigils. And this is what the New York Times had to say after the round the world vigils. The fracturing of the Western alliance over Iraq and the huge anti-war demonstrations around the world this weekend are reminders that there may still be two superpowers on the planet, the United States and world opinion. And I believe that the superpower of world opinion and citizen engagement is core to our success going forward. I was happy to find out that you can have viral moments that are a happier event, at least that was for Move On. There was huge member energy and excitement about the run in 2008 for Obama. So the core of Move On, and I'm going to try and go through all of this pretty fast. Yes, that is the core of Move On. Strong vision, big ears. It's about us listening to our members. We're nothing if we're not doing what our members are asking us to do and most important to them. So, core thing to remember about Move On, we had 3 viral moments. That's from '98. Viral moments don't happen all the time, true viral moments. The ability to raise big dollars from average citizens was really a kind of game-changing moment. Move On petitions are where we're at right now, so it's Move On members sending petitions to their friends and then us helping them send it wider and wider. That's where all of our petitions are coming from now. It's from our own members. So it's truly member-powered. And then the other thing I'm really proud of about Move On is one of hundreds, thousands of organizations now doing really impressive online citizen engagement. And that's what we need for healthy democracy, or it's part of what we need. This is a picture from what led me to the next stage of my adventures in organizing. I was reading a book, The F Word, Feminism in Jeopardy, and got to the data point that it turns out that it's not there's a huge bias against women in the workplace, there's a huge bias against mothers. Okay, how many people here are mothers? All right. How many people here have or had mothers? Go. Yeah. Everybody is invited to be part of this movement. It's really wrong that a single mom is likely to make 60 cents to an equally qualified man's dollar. In fact, that begins to explain why there's so few women, so many mothers and children in poverty, and also why there's so few women in leadership. It goes both ways. Of the last 6 Supreme Court justices, 3 men and 3 women, all the men had children, none of the women did. In the Fortune 500, we have about 20 women CEOs, and yet we know that for a decade or more, we have more women graduating with PhDs than men. Something is going on, and as a business person, I saw this data, and I wrote a 2-page paper called the Motherhood Manifesto, and then all of a sudden I found myself writing a book. And with Kristen, who wrote the F Word, who is amazing and wonderful. Now, you guys don't know this, but we have a very incredible guest here tonight. Kiki Kupapard is a hero here in Pennsylvania. She is the first story in the Motherhood Manifesto. She moved here from New York because she was a single mom with 2 kids. And she had a great resume and good references. She went to businesses and they asked her, "Are you married? Do you have children?" No one cared to call her references. That was it. She's been trying to pass a law to make it so businesses can't ask, Are you married? Do you have kids? Here in Pennsylvania for over 18 years. She is my hero. She's been working on this. Now I'm going to tell you the sad part of this story. She moved last year to a different county, and she asked her legislator to reintroduce the bill that has failed to pass again and again, and I've been with her trying to push that through. And he replied that he would not introduce it. In fact, if someone introduced it, he would make it sure it would never pass. He did not want businesses to be restricted like that. That's something to think about. Well, we'll get back to that, perhaps. So that's the Motherhood Manifesto. I wrote the book, and then all of a sudden I found myself with an organization called Moms Rising. Funny how these things happen. But Move On works on front page issues. Moms Rising works on largely back burner issues, issues which, like childcare, health care, open flexible work policies, realistic and fair wages, paid sick days, and maternity leave. Very few people realize out of all the countries in the world, there are only 3 that have no paid leave for new mothers. That's Papua New Guinea, Swaziland, and the United States of America. Think about that. One of these countries is not like the other. And we really need to make it possible for mothers to take care of their kids, not be going, should I feed my family today, or shall I take care of my baby? It's not a question any mother should have to ask. But I've got many miles to go. We'll keep going. So Moms Rising, it's part of the next wave of the women's movement. We're collaborating with over 100 policy partners on all the issue areas we're working on. We're promoting family economic security, and we're determined to end maternal profiling. That's bias against mothers in hiring, wages, and advancement. We can do it. It's a combination of a structure, a systems problem that doesn't support families, coupled with a cultural problem. And we have to address both of those. So, and we have over 1 million members. I like that. And you all should be members now. I'm not here for nothing. Yeah. This one really fascinates me. It turned out that all the work practices that are good for mothers are actually good for everyone. And that's why I wrote the Custom Fit Workplace with Nanette. And we put up a website too, because Moms Rising, we were afraid the guys might be a little put off with it. There's no pink on the book. We want to stay out of the pink ghetto. This is good for businesses. It's good for businesses to treat all their workers with deep respect. Workplace practices that honor workers' responsibilities, both on the job and off, have higher productivity, lower turnover, and a much happier workforce. That's a recipe for having a great business. So, the book is a menu of opportunities, flexible work. Everybody here knows someone that has flexibility in the workplace. Virtual work or telework. I've been working remotely for over 15 years, and I can't tell you how productive it is. In fact, I wrote the Motherhood Manifesto with Kristen on mommy time, which means not at the times the kids are around. And we never saw each other the whole time. It's amazing things you can do when you're focused and want to get it done. Modern career tracks. The New York Times a year ago had accounting firms arguing about who had the more flexible, better career tracks because they were losing very valuable talent at the top, and hugely trained women. It turns out that working 60 hours and 70 hours a week is not always good full-time for years and years on end. You need to be able to allow a flow. And yes, men sometimes need to take a slow point. Maybe a parent gets ill or they have an injury. There are times when people should be able to have a career that fits them. One of my best friends is a doctor. She worked 80% time when she had, for 15 years, when she had 3 kids. Now she is the most prized leader at Kaiser East Bay. She's got a fabulous team, and Kaiser is so lucky to have her. They're, working with the realities of having someone that has a family and dealing with it well has given them a hugely productive workforce. Contract work, there's a dark side to contract work, but there's also a side that is very adaptive. And babysit work is a formalized program for taking babies into the workplace. It's very good for certain kind of workplaces. High commitment work practices are my absolute favorite. Results only workplace is somewhat famous, I hope. Anyone heard of a results only workplace here? Okay, not famous enough yet. We're working on it. Now you know, results only workplace, Girl Scouts use it, GAP uses it. It's something where they're not keeping track of time, they're only keeping track of, are you meeting your commitments? And that's a good way to manage, even if you're not a formal results only workplace. I kind of don't get it why people do it differently. But you can also have very high commitment workplaces in factories. And these places tend to be, once again, very respect-based and that level of trust. I went to Texas to see a manufacturing plant that had gone through a high performance workplace training and had been doing that for 6 months, and talked to the managers and asked them, what made it different? Why is it? And they talked about more laughter on the floor, less absenteeism. If something went wrong in the line, people would go and say, this is how you fix it. You know, people took more initiative. And then the manager of the drivers told me about going to church on Sunday and seeing one of his drivers there in a suit with his kids and a respected elder in that community. And what it was communicating to me is that there was a time when he just saw them as drivers. Now he sees the people that report to him as his peers outside of work. And I think that's a really profound difference in the way people are treated and feel in the workplace. I'm very excited about that. So the book has stories, and it's the beginning of another movement, I hope, where that becomes the norm. But it turns out we're still not getting to where I dream of. And that's a place where we're working collaboratively together. In fact, the issue I think is most serious is climate change. And I believe that there's going to be some consensus that climate is a huge issue within the next 2 to 5 years. And at that time, if our leadership is as functional as it is today, say like the budget or healthcare, it's a disaster. So I don't care what people get talking about. I think there's the need for us to start building relationships, start talking to each other, start really caring about each other so we can work collaboratively. It will be good for us now, and it's going to be incredibly important if we are going to retain our position in the world. Now, before I get into the living room conversation specifics, this is a really important quote. Research shows, and I do this for scientists in particular, that many of our assumptions about how to reach people different from us are flat wrong. We can't count on facts to change minds. Emotions and values trump facts almost every time. So to take this in a really practical, because people are like, really? I really like facts. But think about it. If someone you don't trust tells you something, you just kind of discount the facts they give you. We don't really hear each other till we have some shared, we know we like each other, we have some shared values. And then all of a sudden the facts are very useful. Or if you want to take it on an evolutionary scale, if I convince one of my conservative friends that climate's a huge problem, and they go back to their community where it's considered just ridiculous, that person might get shunned. And when you're shunned, evolutionarily speaking, you die. So there's really negative consequences to shunning. Instinctually, we avoid that. So we need to do something different and start building relationship. And I have wanted, for years I wanted to, average citizens are so much more reliable, common sense, smart. Then, once you get into politics, there are all these negative dynamics going on. What if we just sat down, just a few of us who have relationships, friends and friends of friends work really well online. How about in person? So if I invite my friend who's a conservative And he invites two of his friends, and I invite two of my friends. Can we have a good conversation? And we did this in an experiment on energy/climate change. The pilot project revealed that we live in self-segregated communities, and most people are anxious about speaking to people with different views. That's where we are now. And we couldn't even create a fact sheet that would work for climate. So we really should only talk about energy on a first conversation. But every conversation was successful in that people liked each other. And participants found common ground on conserving energy and creating greater energy independence. As well, people felt they were heard and learned something from others' viewpoints. There's this, when you separate yourself out too much, which has happened way too much in this country, people start thinking of the other as, mean or not so bright or arrogant or whatever it is, and you stand with people and you hear in that first hour of a living room conversation, it's very structured to make it a safe place. You've agreed to certain ground rules. And then you go through, the first thing is, why did you come? Who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What are your hopes for the future? By the time you're done with the first few rounds, you like the people you're sitting down with, and then you hear them in a whole new way. So what are the ground rules? It's what you learned in kindergarten, pretty much. Be curious and open to learning. Show respect. Suspend judgment. Look for common ground. Be authentic. Welcome it from others. Be purposeful and to the point. Own and guide the conversation. 6 ground rules. And everybody agrees to them ahead of time. This is a very transparent process. I find my friend, I share these ground rules, I show them the conversation rounds that we would go through, and we agree, okay, let's give this a try in our living room. And have some good food there because, well, when you break bread together, it's a good thing. And my hope there, now living room, Moms Rising is a really great organization, pretty substantial now. So is Move On, 8 million members. Living Room Conversations is me and Debbie Lynn, who works half-time, and people that are helping out here and there. So this is the garage startup. This is the innovation at the very beginning. That's why I'm here talking to you, telling you, you want to do this, don't you? And if you do it, then I've succeeded, and if not, I have to learn how to do this talk better. Because I've seen things go viral, and we're trying to make something so simple that anyone can do it about whatever issue they care the most about, so that we can have living room conversations. I believe citizens are sick, when you talk about what's the right timing, I think citizens are sick of the status quo. We have more independents than we have Democrats, more independents than we have Republicans. I think there's a reason. The Congress is not popular. And I'm a mediator by training. The quality of an adversarial solution compared to the quality of a collaboratively derived solution is profoundly different. I hear from my conservative friends ideas about the healthcare system, and they have some good ideas. But as long as we're just in battles defending our positions, we get somewhere, but it's not the full distance we need to go. Living room conversations are simple so that organizations and individuals can use the process. That's the goal. And we're going to keep evolving. It's an open source project. People use them. They send back information. We make them better. The ground rules are simpler than they used to. It used to be 7. So empower citizens to lead and tap the wisdom of crowds. And I've seen with Moms Rising and Move On that citizens are smart. They care. They're wonderful people. Let's tap that. Wikipedia uses citizens to have this amazing information source. YouTube, all this creativity goes up on YouTube all the time. Can't we do that with living room conversations? So we're trying to build relationships with people that hold different views so that it's easier for them to appreciate different perspectives. That first conversation, it's a lot about listening. So that collaborative problem solving is possible. And we can find, share, win 100% and 80% solutions. This is a picture from January of this year. I invited Mark Meckler, who I'd been getting to know on the phone for over a year. He is the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. he and I had a living room conversation at my house with 2 of his friends and 2 of my friends and his wife's coffee cake, which is really good. We had a wonderful conversation about crony capitalism. We disagree on so much. We've explored some of our disagreements too, but we decided to start with something where we had a lot of agreement. We found common ground on a lot. And it's led me to investigating deeply in some new areas, because I'm seeing we got almost 100% agreement here. What can we do in the criminal justice system with Glass-Steagall? So the conversations we have in the mix right now, already the questions framed for conversation is energy, money in politics, immigration, the role of local government, the failure of the war on drugs. That's one that Mark will tell you that he can't find any conservatives that think it's a success either. Empowering local communities to participate in decisions about how to handle low-level offenders. That's very specific. We actually just got funded to do that, and I am so excited about it. We're going to do that in California in 2 counties, and it will help us then hopefully go out to all 58 and hopefully change things all around the country ultimately. So here's a quote that I love from one of the conversations that was done in New Hampshire about the role of government. The conversation captured what I find to be missing from modern media and modern political narratives, a sense that what we share as Americans is far deeper and more important than what divides us. A sense that we still have a chance to reach across partisan divides to identify both the core of our disagreements and the kernel of realistic compromises. I am overjoyed that someone comes away saying that, and we've got a lot of dang good quotes on that level. And I want to see more of them, and I want to share the stories, and I want to help create a virtuous cycle of living room to online sharing to living room to helping each other have amazing conversations. And then we live happily ever after with rainbows. That is my story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Victor DeSantis. I'm the Associate Provost for Civic Engagement, and as somebody who believes in civic engagement so deeply, I appreciate your comments. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce a couple of our esteemed faculty on campus who are going to take part in the next phase of our discussion this evening, which is an actual living room conversation. And so I want to introduce colleagues. I want to introduce Dr. Nosley Hardy, Dr. Carrie Smith, and Dr. Tracy Wise, 3 colleagues from campus who are going to be part of the conversation. You should be thinking about your questions, because once we conclude the living room conversation portion of the event, we will have an open Q&A session with all of you.
Hello. So if this really was a living room conversation, round one would be, why did you come here tonight? So I think we probably aren't doing an actual formal living room conversation so much as sitting up on stage and talking about it. And the workplace stuff, because I know you care about the workplace stuff too.
Well, I think I would like to talk about why I decided to come tonight. Because at one point in the middle of a very busy week, I said to myself, why did I say yes?
Does she have a mic?
I do have one, but you can't hear me?
It's just pretty low.
Let me try again.
Maybe you need it closer to your, I don't know. I'm not mic proficient.
Is this better?
Talk a little louder.
I can talk really loud.
Shouters up here.
Yeah. I was asking myself in the middle of the week why I said yes to this invitation when there's so much going on. And I think one of the reasons I said yes was because I believe very powerfully in conversation. And the picture that struck me was the one with the big ears. and the vision. And I often think about our classrooms as places of real life, not as preparation for real life. And I think that's a common phrase, oh, we're getting you ready for this real life that you're going to have later on. And one of the things that struck me is that sometimes we expect the students to have big ears, but the faculty doesn't have to have big ears. And so I guess one of the things I'd like to start thinking about is how can our classes be places of democratic practice, and how can they, where it's appropriate, really model living room conversations. And I was telling a short story about another speaker we had a number of years ago, and we read the book as a campus before the speaker came. And at dinner with the speaker, one of the students was so excited about the whole thing, and she said, "This is great, we should do this more often." And I said, "What?" "Read really good books and talk about them." And I said, "Sweetie, that's the enterprise we have here. You know, you should be doing this every day in your classes." So that's one thing I'd like us to talk about, is how in our dorm rooms and our classrooms we can have living room conversations about things that really matter.
You have made me very happy. And I'm happy to help if anyone has framing issues.
Well, the reason I came, to be perfectly honest, I was invited sometime last week, and my initial instinct was to say no. The reason is we have a 4.5-year-old and 2.5-year-old, and they go to daycare at 8 a.m. because both my husband and I are professors. And so by the time 4 o'clock rolls around, there is nothing more I want to do than to see my children and spend the next several hours with them, doing anything with them, taking them anywhere we go. But it also occurred to me that, I wonder what I would have to contribute to this conversation, and I wasn't sure, but I thought I would have a lot to learn from it. I thought I could get a lot out of what other people thought, what they had to say. So my motive, and, to enhance the person I am, and thus the professor I am, the mother I am, the wife I am, the person I am. And so I'm really here for very selfish reasons, which is just to listen and learn from the conversation.
Well, thank you. I am impressed. It is 2 and 4. That's very cute ages.
Yes.
I feel honored that you would.
Thank you.
And they are adorable children, let me tell you.
Thank you, Carrie. I have good friends.
I work at Moms Rising. We have cute little noises in the background all the time on their conference calls, and
Yes, those are
we
necessary.
send pictures to each other.
Yeah.
You could have brought them here tonight.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
They would have been delighted to be here. They're very outgoing. Yeah.
We go for children at work as well as babies at work in some places.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I was invited to come here, and I said yes because I'm a huge fan of Joan's work with momsrising.org. And I teach a sociology of the family class, and I actually have shown Joan's film that comes with the book. If you all don't know this, I'm going to give you a plug for momsrising.org. You can go and buy the film on disc along with the book for I think like $15, and I show it in class. And the first time I showed it, I wasn't sure what the response was going to be. And it turned out, like you said, a lot of people watching the film, especially students, no matter what their political beliefs were, all rallied around the points mentioned in the film. And that was eye-opening to me, that I knew I had students who were politically very different than I was. And they had the same responses to it. Wow, that's great if we could do this for all of us. I was also thinking about the living room conversations. I went on the website, looked at it last week, and I shared this story with Tracy earlier. Last year, one of our faculty members in the communication department did a reflect and discuss session on how to have civil dialogue. Let me tell you right now, for those of you in the audience who do know me, it will be no surprise to you that I showed up and destroyed the civility of the dialogue. I showed up, and so I was really intrigued by the slides you put up about facts, right? Facts don't change people's minds. It's the emotions and the values that do. Because what happened in that discussion was the question came up of whether somebody has the right to really voice their opinion. And somehow the President Obama birther controversy came up. And I didn't yell, I don't think. But I said, no, it's a fact. He is a citizen, and you do not get to voice your opinion, after which I had to apologize to the faculty and the student for not being civil. So I'm actually really intrigued now learning about living room conversations, because personally, I don't think that's something I do very well. I think what Tracy said is true. We expect our students to have these big ears, but we don't expect the faculty to listen. And that's something I'm hoping that learning this may actually help me do, to actually help me listen better to others, especially people who may not have the same views as I do, because you're right, people live in these self-segregated communities where it gets too exhausting to talk to other people who don't think the same way you do. I don't know if you all have had this experience. I'm driving in the car, I'm listening to something on NPR, I get so frustrated, I turn it off because I can no longer listen to it. And that's NPR, you know, so. But I think this is a great idea for us to actually model a living room conversation and learn for us how to listen. So.
Well, one of the interesting stories I told in one of the classes today was Public Conversations Project is our fiscal sponsor. And one of the most famous things they did is back when there was violence at the abortion clinics, they in secret brought together 3 leaders of the pro-life and 3 of the pro-choice movement for secret conversations for 5.5 years. And what happened is the women learned to care about each other, to love each other, really. But it didn't change each other's opinions. In fact, it reaffirmed their opinions. But it did reduce the violence, because that out of that mutual respect and relationship, there was born the desire to keep things from getting violent. And I believe that we'll find common ground in all sorts of cases. But relationship, simple human relationship, is a value also, in addition to the more intellectual piece. So there's heart and there's head, and sometimes it all comes together, and other times you get part of it. In the living room conversations, you know, we know what the first conversation is, but what's the second conversation? We're hoping that you will help us find out. And in some cases, you're going to want to have a third conversation that's facilitated. And there are all sorts of wonderful dialogue processes to help people go deeper when there are issues that are tricky and need more assistance. But I think it's such a necessary part of progressing as a civil society.
I think you raise an important point, which is that I think once we realize that it is actually not only all right and acceptable, but it is feasible for other people to have opinions that are different from yours, you know. So sometimes we think, well, this is my opinion, that's your opinion, we'll never meet, you know, never the twain shall meet. But I think if we just acknowledge, well, that is their opinion, and this is my opinion, and it actually should not take away from any quality of life or any quality of conversation. And I say that because it is true, I am, you know, a liberal, you know, and my husband's family is ultra-conservative. I mean, they're as Republican as you can get. And so is my own family, by the way. So my husband and I are the, you know, we are the liberal professors of the family. But, you know, it occurs to me that, and I'll talk about my husband's family. He has 4 siblings, all of them ultra-Republican. And, you know, and yet we have the same family values. We care about our family. We care about each other. We call each other when we know somebody needs help. We love each other's children. So, you know, and not that I really think about it too much, but it occurs to me that I don't see them as a different entity anymore, because in our in our daily dealings, in our weekly dealings, we have the same core values. And so I actually, even though I do not agree with their point of view, I see that it is valid to them, and that is enough. And I think in a way they also accept that my husband's opinion and my opinion, it's valid for us, and that's enough. But one of the things that I've had to talk about with them is, they bring up Palestine and Israel, and I'm from another part of the world where for a long time, the Palestinian perspective was very much a live discussion, and on our dinner table, for example, I would talk about, oh, those poor people from Palestine. And my father said, yes, that is true, but what I'd like you to do right now is I want you to argue the Israeli side. And my father he's a bit dictatorial, so if he said that, you have to do it. And so it served me well.
I think we have the same father.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We talked about it.
Yeah,
we have the
we
same
do.
father.
We have the same
It's
father.
Just, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, but, and it was a very enriching experience for me because in fact their side was the same, I found, in terms of what they wanted. And so I think what I'm trying to say here is that at some point as people, as human beings, if we just acknowledge that, just because we have different points of view, so what? And that's fine. Their point is valid to them, my point is valid to me, and that's that.
Well, there's another piece of this I find really interesting and challenging and key for democracy is points of view. There are places where points of view are fine, and there are places where you've got facts, and we have separate realities, and that's, there are times when you need to make decisions. And when we're living with separate realities, we can't have a real conversation. I realized after Mark and I had that great conversation, he couldn't talk about fracking. Because if I believed what he believes about fracking, I think it was a great idea too. And if he believed what I believe about fracking, he'd think it was a disaster. Now, somewhere there are some facts, because some things are, once you start fracking, very physical things happen to your environment. But I'm not an expert on fracking, nor is he. We both have trusted experts. So as citizens, I think we have to start, requiring good information on some level. We need to talk, so we go, wait a minute, we've got different facts here.
Right.
We need to get facts that we can share so we can have a conversation. There's something deeply disrespectful to me that communities all around this country, and I know in Pennsylvania it's big, in California it's big, they're having pitched battles based on money and power when they don't have the facts to be able to have a thoughtful conversation together because they don't share facts.
Yeah, I think, too, what I'm seeing with my students, I went to the University of California at Santa Cruz. For those of you who don't know UC Santa Cruz, we have a protest every semester just for the heck of it, to shut down the campus, to make a point. I'm making it sound sort of frivolous, but there are very important things that we get behind. And one of the things I often ask my students is, the president's not here, is he? Okay. We have wide open space right outside the news smack. It is a perfect place for congregating for a protest. Do it. Why aren't you doing it? And I think this idea of responsibility, feeling the need to be responsible as part of a community. I go online a lot, and I read not just the articles, because as a sociologist, the most fun part are always the comments. And the comments are horrific. There is a lack of respect. There is a lack of responsibility. I always like to say to people, the First Amendment gives you freedom of speech, but freedom of speech also requires responsibility of speech. And so I see people going online and saying these horrible things, and you go, well, at some point, you have to be responsible for what you say and what you claim the facts are. And I think you're right, sort of the being able to acknowledge, boy, we have different information here. I'm going to own up and say, okay, I don't know which is true, and let's have a discussion about it. And it's really hard, I think, for a lot of us because we're so emotionally vested in, I know this is true, right?
Well, my decision with fracking was not to have a discussion about it because I didn't have. It was to say, we've got to put the experts together and have them have a facilitated discussion where they give us a single set of facts.
Right.
And if they can't agree, then what I want to see is for them to give us a plan for how they can come out with an agreement in 2 months, 20 years. I want to know where you are and how you're going to get to a shared answer. Because that's the way we become empowered as citizens.
Absolutely.
I mean, the heart of living room conversations and custom fit work is really about having respect for citizens and workers.
One of the things that strikes me about a conversation we had earlier this semester was the decision to move the annual One Book, One Campus conversation out of the classroom into the residence halls, which is the dormitory living rooms. And I think the conversations about the books that were held in the classroom were the teachers with the big voices and the small ears. And I think when we went into the dormitories, we were going into the students' homes. We were their guest. And all of a sudden, I think the professors had to assume a different posture in those conversations. And we had to listen rather than just talk. And so I guess for me, one of the questions, I keep trying to bring it back to the campus and to the classroom, is why is it that there's such a disjuncture between, as one student suggested, between the classroom practice and then these living room conversations, or these really exciting books that we talk about in spaces other than the classroom? It's a little sobering to think that the classrooms are not what we think they are, what we hope them to be, that there's some place where conversation maybe is closed down as often as it is opened up. It seems to me that when we think about what we learn, I mean, honestly, I'm struck by your conversation about your family, that where the possibility of seeing people beyond their kind of political allegiances came out of probably living rooms, conversations, and the domestic arena where people shared their lives at a deep level.
Yes. Yeah, I think when you see, people go through illnesses and sicknesses, and you see they're vulnerable, and you put yourself in their shoes, and then suddenly their point of view, their political opinion does not matter anymore, because you are at a very basic level of just humanity. And I'm talking because, my sister-in-law was diagnosed with breast cancer a few years ago, and my brother with, lymphoma. And the reason I mention this is because, you see people who mean the world to you, and, we have diametrically opposite points of view, but what does that matter? So I think that, we tend to see the world through our eyes, through our past, through our experiences. And when I came to Millersville, I was a little bit intimidated because I walked into a classroom that seemed very homogenous to me, and I thought, I had just moved from New York City, and I thought, I wonder how I'm going to relate to these students, and how are they going to relate to me? It was something that caused me some concern, and and even I doubted that I would last here for more than a year or so. But then, it became about computer science. It became about their interests, about their future. They wanted to know what could they do in the world, and suddenly how we grew up and our other opinions. So I think if you just look beyond, as you do, beyond the differences and just the basic humanity, that is all the same for us. It seems a little bit more real.
And I think you're right, that it means acknowledging, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
If we're going to have a discussion about climate change, I wish I understood the science better. I'm going to defer to a scientist to explain to me the science. I'm not going to tell you I know everything. And I think once we step away from thinking we know everything, then I think the conversation becomes different. right? I watched the students, and I have learned this in the classroom. I ask students a question, and nobody will answer. And I realized they wouldn't answer because they think there's a right answer, and they are afraid to raise their hand and look stupid. So I've had to learn to say, okay, here's a question, and I've had to learn to say, look, I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know that there's a right answer. I really want to hear what you're thinking. And slowly the hands go up. Oh, there's no right answer. Now I can feel free to voice what I think. And I think that's been really helpful in letting people know, look, I don't have a right answer. And I also wonder to what extent, I'm looking at the computer scientists here too, that part of what makes a living room conversation work is that we're actually face to face with each other in the same space. Would this work if we were Skyping from different places? That's what I was wondering. I wanted to know what you think about that.
People could try it, but I think the actual breaking bread together and being in physical proximity, there's so much you get from you. So I think it really has to be the in-person to online sharing of information to in-person. Now, it may be once you have relationships that you can move into a more virtual way of communicating. But I think you need that relationship. To build trust, you need to get pretty personal, especially if you feel like there's a real big division. One thing I was going to mention about living room conversations in families, last year I blogged about it, because families are the one place where I don't give you a, yeah, go ahead and do it message, because we're relying on the social norms of being a guest in a living room conversation. What are families known for? Well, yeah, they'll step beyond those. And if you co-host one, you're thinking, is this person I'm inviting someone that can abide by this set of guidelines and willing to follow a structure? Because we all know we have a few friends that probably wouldn't be right for it too. So I say anyone can do it that's willing to, follow by a certain set of guidelines.
Well, I'm just provoked by your comment about the importance of a face-to-face conversation first, again, going back to the classroom, because it seems to me it severely challenges our notion of totally online education. If we think that a face-to-face conversation, at least at the beginning, is essential for the development of trust. And maybe after we have that face-to-face conversation, we could Skype with you next week because we've had this opportunity. But to the extent that we think education and civil discourse go hand in hand.
I can say that working at Move On and Moms Rising, I've worked with people for sometimes years without meeting them and developed deep trust. If you're in a situation where you're aligned. But I think when you have significant differences that you're very anxious about, the possibilities for really developing deep trust is much harder in a not in-person environment. Not to say that there aren't some really significant advantages to in-person learning. And the other thing, the custom-fit workplace is about, and school is work.
Absolutely.
Yes,
It's,
I agree.
yeah.
For everyone.
For everyone.
It's all about different people are better in different venues. There's some people that are really good working virtually, and there's some people that are absolutely a disaster, and they shouldn't do that. So I give you odds that in the educational setting, there are some people that they really need to be in a physical classroom, and there are other people that would actually be better off in a virtual classroom, and probably a broad swath in between. And that's, you have a lot of new possibilities in education now, and figuring out what's the optimal offering is going to be a really interesting adventure.
Well, if we're moving toward the custom-fit classroom, I think we're still constrained by the idea that results-only education would really challenge, I think, the way we do things, because I think we're still stuck in the seat time everybody has to show up on Tuesday and Thursday from 1 to 2:15. And if I said to my students, well, we're going to move to a results-only, arrangement, that would be enormous transformation for me and for my students, I think. And I don't know how that would go. How comfortable I would be,
How would you measure results only in a classroom?
I don't know, you guys are the teachers.
Well, you know what? I think as you were both talking, Tracy and Carrie, it occurs to me that you get the best results when you're able to have follow-up questions. And what I mean by this is, and I have to admit it. Recently, I'm on Facebook. My husband, I have a Facebook thing. But recently, someone made a horrible comment on Facebook about, it was anti-diversity, and obviously, as you can imagine, that strikes me negatively.
I saw that comment. Yes.
And so it was so, in my opinion, horrific and anti-diverse. I was tempted to defriend the person, but then it occurred to me that, that's not the person I want to be just defriending. But what I'm trying to say here is, based on one comment, you might dislike somebody, you might resolve never to talk to that person again. But when you have the opportunity to ask a follow-up question, like, what did you mean by that? So for example, let me just give you an example. A few years ago, I was just talking about, it was just, I didn't even know these people. It was just some strangers we were out there, we just brought up a conversation, and, somebody said, well, I believe this group of people should just die, So normally if I just saw that on Facebook, I would never want to be their friend. I would say, oh, this is terrible. But I had the opportunity to say, but what do you mean, and why? And then we went into the conversation, and we talked about it, and I said, actually, the group of people you're talking about, I am actually one of those people, because, this person wasn't able to discern exactly where I was from the world, and actually said, these people should die. And so we reached a point after this follow-up conversation where this person acknowledged, well, yeah, I wouldn't want you to just die right now, so maybe I can think about it. So, which was kind. So I think this is what this facilitates, the back and forth.
Would it be acceptable if we invited more folks into your conversation at this point?
Please.
And
Absolutely.
invited a larger group of friends, maybe if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have feedback, I want to invite you. We've got mics set up on both sides of the room, but we want to open up the audience and invite more people into this living room. Don't all jump up at once now. Please, by all means.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm really excited and energized by listening to all of these things. Come up.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I wanted to just ask, I've often come up against that brick wall, thinking about, I listen to my favorite news sources and read my favorite blogs, and other people who think totally the opposite have their facts from their news sources and their blogs and articles that they read. And so, yeah, I've come up against that brick wall. What do we do when we both have facts that we both believe passionately in? And I love the idea of getting together, getting to know each other, finding the humanity and the common ground. And I have these fears in my head. I want to approach people about having these conversations. And how do you respond to the cynical person that might just say, well, what's the point? We'll just, like you said, never the twain shall meet. This is all just warm, fuzzy stuff, rainbows and finding the beauty of humanity, but is it ever going to fix anything, really? Like, I know that you've probably come across that, and how do I get over that fear of receiving that response?
The question is, do you have one friend that you think would be a good co-host? All you need to do is find one friend. And I live in Berkeley, so it's not as though there are a lot of conservatives in my world.
That's another statement.
Mark was someone that a friend introduced me to his friend, and he introduced me to him. And, so it was a multiple step process to get to know Mark. And I was incredibly anxious having him over with his friends, but we very intentionally talked about what would be a constructive conversation for us and our friends at that time. And we knew there were many things that shouldn't be our first conversation. So depending on, now you may have a local issue where you want to talk about some local issue where you actually have a great deal in common, and that in fact having a bipartisan group step up and say, we really want X to happen would be a very powerful thing. So that's one possibility. I'll also say when my friend's in Berkeley, she grew up in New Hampshire. She didn't have Berkeley friends, but on Facebook actually has, she found friends in New Hampshire. One of her friends from high school was a Tea Party leader. And so she hosted with a Tea Party leader friend, and they had high school get-together 10 years later. Had a wonderful conversation and really enjoyed it. And I've heard stories about ongoing relationship following that would never have happened otherwise. And this is just from the early adapters. And early adapters, you guys, early adapters are golden. Have you ever seen the video of a guy dancing? You know, you've got this leader out there dancing and looking like an idiot until the second person comes and dances with him, and then people start joining in. So I'm asking you guys to be early adapters and not have me looking like an idiot dancing out there all alone.
This point. So if you want to raise your hand, I've got a little cable here. All right.
That's okay. Hi. I was thinking about the living room conversation, and maybe somebody is also thinking about this. Moms demand action for gun sense in America, and the NRA. So who are the co-hosts? Is anybody bringing this? I mean, it just seems to me that this is an issue that isn't going to go away, and you know, people dug in, each with their own facts, each with a view that the other is completely wrong, and I'm not sure that that's correct. So is that happening? I mean, the improbability of pro-choice and pro-life is, I think, only trumped by the improbability of NRA and moms demand sense for gun action.
That's a really good question. I do not know of anyone that's taken that on. I think if I were to do that, I would hope to find, you know, and I believe a lot of people have friends that are part of the NRA, and that I'd start with the very simple conversation about, you know, having a background check at gun shows. You know, find something really simple where there's a lot of and then it really is about listening, and it might be frustrating at some point, but it would be an interesting challenge seeing where it goes. I don't have the answer, but you're right, that's a hot cultural issue. And yeah, my friend Mark's understanding about gun safety and mine, that's another place where there's a world of difference.
But the damage, the devastation is so profound. I just don't know how it can be ignored much longer. I mean, it's...
Well, right now it's being...
It's just bizarre.
Right now it's being done as standard political battle. And this would be, you know, looking to see if relationship can be built. And I tend to believe that could happen. With Moms Rising, we have stepped into the gun story, and we've had NRA moms say, I support background checks. Now, I don't know how broad that is. And it's probably not terribly broad because there's so much cultural friction. I think it's probably very hard to be part of a community that's strongly supportive of the NRA and say, I support background checks. You know, think about that shunning issue. I bet it's hard. And so I think creating real support and appreciation for that might be of value. I'd hope it would be.
On that side of the room.
I really appreciate, Joan, that you co-founded Move On, because Move On is just a wonderful organization, and for a short period of time, it made politics fun.
Thank you.
One of the concerns I have with the conversations you're having tonight is you keep using the word liberal. It doesn't play well in the conservative community. I would use the word progressive. It's much harder to defeat when you use the word progressive.
You know, that's funny. I tend to use progressive and not liberal. I hadn't been hearing myself say liberal, but I will try and be more careful.
Okay. And your idea of ending maternal profiling, real commendations on showing that it is not smart to discriminate against individuals because you're missing your good and best candidates. It's just silly to take half the population and say you're the Roman Catholic Church, no digs on them. But why would they not want women? Why would they not want married people? They're cutting down their pool of talent. It just does not make economic sense. And sorry to pontificate, but also on climate change, we have a depleting amount of oxygen in our environment today. And that's a fact that those who are fighting climate change can't argue against. If you're in Canada, climate change is wonderful. It's opening up all of the rivers and the valleys. But oxygen, we all need that. And that is the way I would approach the climate change conversation. Sorry to throw those opinions out, but just I couldn't stop myself. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I do know from a friend who did a conversation, not a conversation, but at West Point, they've approached climate change through energy. That's the word that they use to talk about climate change, and it was very successful.
I was just wondering if from these living room conversations, if you were hoping that eventually people would kind of form groups and want to take action on a certain topic that they've discussed at length through the conversations.
I am hoping that will happen. I think if there are hundreds or thousands of conversations about the failure of the drug war and some concrete solutions, that will create a strong basis for leadership to actually do something about it. It's a fascinating problem that you've got what's pretty close to consensus, and yet we're not seeing change happen. And I'm very eager to investigate how to make the change happen on that. Likewise on Glass-Steagall, we found we had agreement that, no, we don't really want to insure banks so that if they gamble with our money and win, they get it, and if they lose, we pay for it. That's not really, nobody really wants that. That's a regular citizen. But we've got such bad dynamics in the media and with politics right now that politicians that are working collaboratively are so likely to get hurt by it. We need to counter that. That's our job as the citizens. At least I believe it is.
Hi. I just want to make a little bit of a comment, and maybe I zero in on the fracking issue. Just so you know my own biases, I mean, I personally, I think, and I'm no expert on it, but I think it will be an environmental disaster. But the reason I'm bringing it up is not to talk about fracking so much, but to talk about discussion of politics very often involves the very fundamental issue of what side your bread is buttered on. And that I really think is at the root of an awful lot of the problems. In the example of fracking, I've got some friends that have a lovely cabin in northern Pennsylvania, and they love to go fishing and take hikes and things like that, and they're absolutely dead set against the fracking. But I'm sure, I'll bet I could find you a lot of people who are making a lot of money on royalties, and they think fracking is just great. And the bread and butter issue goes through an many of the issues. And if it doesn't actually involve the emotion, for example, in the gun issue, I mean, I've got friends who are, on way over on both sides of this issue. And, but behind that is a gun lobby that makes a lot of money. The more guns they sell, the more ammunition they sell, the more money they make. And, we could think of example after example where it just comes to M-O-N-E-Y. And I don't know how you get over that obstacle. So, just my observation.
Well, that's the money in politics conversation to some extent. And it's, so far, there's been a lot of talk about the corruption that's caused by that, and we haven't succeeded in getting over it. That doesn't mean it's time to give up, though.
I have two things. One on the issue of fracking. I'm a 2011 graduate. I'm returning for grad school. I have a friend who's also a 2011 graduate, biology major. And she got to work in northern Pennsylvania for a while for an environmental agency, kind of running tests and that sort of thing. And I just was struck, her biggest reflection of that experience was that the issues aren't that cut and dry. It'd be nice if they could do the environmental tests and have a clear-cut answer. This is good for the environment or bad for the environment. And she was blown away by how conflicting the data was, and there wasn't a clear spot. And it's a subject I don't know a lot about, but I wanted to share that reflection on the fracking issue and kind of the science behind it, that it's not maybe clear-cut, and that's why we're kind of just guessworking. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, too, is or just mention, we talked about the idea of work, like focusing on results instead of kind of like time or effort in the workplace, and brought it a little bit into what that might look like in the higher ed classroom. And I just want to also offer the perspective of what that would look like in our K through 12 system, of a kid that's has something going on that day, really might not be able to focus, but the lesson's done and over with that day. And does our system need to group students the way we group it and move a lesson the way, move along when a kid's not ready necessarily, but can we focus on the results and not the time frame and the structure? Can we do something different there as well?
Thank you.
Yes. I think one of the important things that I've noticed listening, Joan, the several times we've been at the classes, is the concept of the living room group. We're all seeing a version of it here. My questions are working towards what determines the way in which the group functions. There are 4 people on the stage there. Should there be 6, 8, 10, or 12? Is there a number factor that would make some of the issues that people have more viable, because more voices could be heard? Secondly, are there pieces of information that need to be shared but need also to be protected to some degree because they could be misrepresented or misused? Thirdly, does the group continue, as you foresee it, from one time of meeting to another time and so forth? Is it a continuous process so that the group grows in terms of analysis? How do they look at alternatives? What are they, and so forth? And will they allow for greater strength rather than weakness? It's very easy to sort of collapse things. What I'm looking for is how does that rainbow grow and go up?
The optimal size, we believe, is 6 people, 2 friends. With different viewpoints, each invite 2 friends, and it tends to be your friends have similar viewpoints. Now, it's an open source project. We've had folks from the mental health world use the living room conversation format to bring together healthcare providers, patients, and their families. and they had 12 people there, and they decided that was too many people. So it's adapting it. People are welcome to do that. I've seen that 6 works very well. My experience with multiple conversations is our first conversation with my friend Amanda was about money and politics. And in that conversation, the immigration issue came up because one of Amanda's friends was talking about illegals. And my friend Elisa, when there was a moment, kind of respectfully said, you know, illegal is a derogatory term. And I was like, no, I didn't know. I mean, he was living in a context where illegal was the common term used for people that didn't have papers. Well, he says, tell me what, he didn't mean to cause offense. He was perfectly happy to change his terminology. And so he asked Elisa, and she said, well, it's people without papers. And one of the other ones, people without papers, WAPs. I'm a WAP, It's like, and all of a sudden people started identifying with immigration. But that was the conversation. It had a lot of energy. So we said, okay, we could have this conversation. Why don't we put it aside and have it? And so we had that as our second conversation. That's the way one worked out. Some conversations, they only end up happening one time because that's when people can get together. Mark and I still plan to have another conversation. It hasn't happened yet. We talk one. So it's a question of opportunity, and you are further down the ride, and you don't have to build the trust the same way the second time. But right now, we need first conversations, and then those first conversations may well turn into second and third and fourth conversations.
I wanted to follow up on your question, Jane, but I limited myself to 3, and you already had 3 questions, so I've made a separate question, which is the role of organizations or institutions in helping to promote living room conversations. And we started by talking about Willow Valley and Socrates Cafe at the reception earlier, and the conversation in your living room. I'm talking about the conversations at the living rooms here at Millersville University, but I know somebody who moved here from out of town was struck by a common question, which is not do you go to church, but where do you go to church? And so what were the roles that you have seen for universities, retirement communities, churches in helping to promote living room conversations in their neighborhoods?
My dream is they will take it and use them, but I can't say that I know New Hampshire use them. I know independent voters use them. San Francisco Community Boards invited me to do an online telephone presentation about living room conversations. But we're still, this is the startup phase.
Have you had any experience with churches? Because it seems to me in Lancaster County that would be a very vibrant place to have
We have
conversations.
interest from churches and even people that teach clergy. But I don't have examples to share yet about what happened in a faith community. I hope to next time.
You talked about the interplay between opinion and fact. I guess my question is, are there facts that are facts? And what about, another speaker talked about the issue of money. Big money in many cases is pushing or paying for, I guess what I would say would be called false facts. How do you deal with that issue?
Well, I certainly believe there are facts that are facts, and it always irritates me deeply when our media will say, here's so-and-so, gives one answer, and here's so-and-so, gives another, about something that actually they can research and tell me which one's true. There are times when there is an actual fact. There are also times, like in fracking, where people don't know yet, that a lot is still up in the air. Is it true that most fracking holes, 6% have some cracks in them when they're first drilled, and by 20 years, 60% will? I don't know. There's a lot changing in the world of fracking right now. I suspect there are many nuances, but there should be studies done to figure out what the odds are, what the risks are, and give us a reasonable chance of making informed decisions. And sometimes those informed decisions will be based upon, we don't know, this is the span of possibilities. We have to accept that.
I always wonder whether I give you the money to do a study and you know ahead of time how long the study will come out. So that's going to be the fact.
There are a lot of people that are aware of that issue being, and anyone that's doing research on that should be putting down who paid for the study. There is notice in the area of food also that can have an impact on, is HBST hormone good or bad for you? Well, we did notice that in the studies that were paid for by the milk industry, no problem. So, and the others, it was highly questionable. There were concerns that were significant.
I was thinking in the Obamacare debate, ads coming out with saying, promulgating something as a fact, which obviously is probably a lie, but it's promulgated as being true.
Ads are notoriously inaccurate. There's one place that, a fact thing that gives you how many Pinocchio noises on your political ads. Go.
Your point is very well taken because you were talking about an ideal world where people are, and I appreciate that, where people are reasonable and they're having an educated conversation. They want to get to the same point. But your point is very well taken because throughout this entire conversation, it occurred to me that you have things like the oil lobby, the big company lobbies, who have funds to generate these ads. And the fact is, people watch TV. They have only a certain amount of time. This is what they're believing, and so you are going up against, and you don't have environmental groups really who have the money and the funding to have to have ads to the contrary. So you are actually fighting against this huge source of information that is lobby-based, that is, that has a lot of backing, so that they can make more money. And your point is very well taken, and I think it's good to know that this is part of what you would have to battle in this living room conversation mode.
Well, the living room conversations, for example, on immigration and crony capitalism, we shared information and we said, and this is the source. Yeah. And most people know that the source has a lot to do with what's being said.
I think that's important to say, and this is my source.
Yes. Yeah. No, this is a university town, and sources are very important. Yeah. Facts may not matter, but sources, they're golden.
Cite the source.
We have time for one more. We have time for one more question, and so here's your final question of the evening.
Hi. One of you, I forget which one, I think it was you in the red, was asking how it might look to have a results-based education as opposed to, I guess, one where you're very concerned with the test and the papers and the presentations. I actually had the great opportunity to go to Germany for about 5 months, and in Germany it was really awesome because we have all these tests and papers and everything else. We had two things. We had a presentation, we had a paper, and it wasn't even on everything we learned. The presentation, what we did was we went and we were basically the teacher for the day. And so the professor kind of sat in the back and we got to actually teach the class. And so it was more of a conversation. We sat in a big circle, and the professor didn't stand up and lecture. She talked with us and it was a conversation. And so when I would lead the class, it was amazing because rather than listening to everyone talk about the papers and whatever we had to do and the test coming up, they sat and they actually had conversations with one another about important, deep conversations about politics that was going on in the world, what was going on in the world. I had so many interesting conversations that were really awkward for me as an American because I was like, how do I ask you about your history? And they were totally open about it. And I was told, Americans, you're so friendly, you're so nice, but we can't be friends with you because you don't ever get into any of the deeper topics. So if you really want to move your students, maybe lecture less and sit down and have a conversation with us and let us lead the conversation. And then we'll start having more results-based education as opposed to the papers and the presentations and God only knows what else projects you have me doing.
you got to respond to that.
I have a response. My short response is I try to use Dan Pink's ideas about mastery and autonomy and purpose as goals in my classroom. And then I tell students that that's what I want them to, in addition to the content knowledge, that they develop mastery, that they exercise autonomy, and that they have a place to develop and articulate their passion and their purpose in the course, and not just rely on me to provide all of those things. But I think sometimes there's resistance to that idea because it requires a lot more on everyone's part.
Yes.
Sure.
And if I can just add, Victor, that I do, I value the point the student made, but I also would like to say that it is also dependent on the type of class. I think in some classes that would work very well. And I think in other classes, like, for example, Introduction to Programming, right, where you're teaching programming and foundational concepts to students, it is imperative, statistics, it is imperative to be able to test their knowledge in a way that shows us, what they got out of this class. But but even in those classes, you're right, it is, to engage the student, to give them a perspective, to listen to them, all of that's important. So maybe there's a balance in the types of classes where there could be more student presentation and, and such. And
Yeah, I want to echo what Tracy said. I try very hard to let my students lead the conversation. Some of my students, I think, are here, and you come into my classroom and it literally starts with, "All right, what'd you think? Go." And to come back to what Tracy said, I come into the classroom every day putting a lot of faith in the students to generate that conversation. And you know what? I think, Tracy, you're right. The students have also been taught, somebody had made a comment about this kind of dialogue and conversation in the pre-K to high school. A lot of students also come in having been taught, whoa, I can't do this. You're the teacher. You're supposed to tell me, right? So I think, yes, we could stand to let students lead the conversation more, but I think students also have to acknowledge that there's a with privilege comes responsibility for you to take on that conversation as well. And let's be honest, we all have good intentions, but sometimes the reading doesn't get done. Okay? And so for students to come in and say, okay, so what did you think? Let's go. That conversation sometimes is is very fruitful, and sometimes it's not. And so I think I think you put it very beautifully. It takes commitment on all our parts to do that. And some days it works out great, and some days it doesn't. But as a teacher, I'm committed to having my students be part of that conversation. So.
Yeah, I saw the notion of commitment on one of your slides earlier tonight. And you chose that word carefully.
Yes.
And I think that's part of how this conversation gets developed and generated. It's through that commitment.
Yes.
I think it was high commitment, Victor, if I remember right.
Yes,
High commitment.
Yeah. I've got.
And I hadn't thought
Yeah.
of this in terms of school settings.
Sure.
You guys just, you brought that
We're
up,
obsessed
not me.
about that.
No doubt.
Just a little.
We've got one more comment that.
One of my partners at Living Room Conversations has basically, I keep on learning things from this process too. And he's like, why talk about the differences? Focus on what your shared goals are. And that really is a great way to work in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent point to end on for the evening. Solution-based discussion. Joan, let me thank you so much for being part of our day here at Millersville University. You have enlightened us and you have engaged us. So thank you so much for making the trip here and being part of our campus community for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Tracy, Nosley, and Carrie, thank you so much for being willing to participate on short notice in a great conversation. I want to say, folks, before you leave this evening, the Innovator in Residence program is a wonderful part of our campus community now. It's part of our fabric, and so I want to thank again Kay and Jane for your support, your philanthropy. I also want to point out that while this is the Innovator in Residence program and we have wonderful conversation here tonight, this is a great precursor to our Human Rights Conference, which will be over the course of the next 2 days. So tomorrow, starting with a luncheon, we'll be talking about all facets of human rights. We have nationally and internationally known speakers that'll be here. Tomorrow evening, we have Cheryl Wu Dunn, a famous author, Half the Sky, coming to speak with us tomorrow night. We have really a full slate of programming for over the next 2 days on all the different areas of human rights, and I think that this conversation tonight and your appearance here today talking about women's rights and so many areas of our concern is really a great kickoff. So thank you for kicking off a wonderful 3-day experience for us on campus. And have a wonderful evening, everyone. Be safe.